So good evening everyone, and GrassCheck. Firstly, thanks for joining us for tonight's webinar, taking time out of your busy day, I'm sure. So my name is Nia Davies, I'm Research and Development Officer for Hybu Cig Cymru in Pomeroy, Wales. And I'm delighted to bring to you tonight's webinar, Getting Started with Rotational Grazing, Principles, Practices and Tips. Tonight we'll be learning about how rotational grazing works on the basic principle of graze and rest, with increased grass growth, quality, leading to better conversion rates for lamb, beef and dairy producers alike. So tonight's webinar is being delivered part of the GrassCheckGB project, which is a collaboration between HCC, QMS, Quality Meat Scotland, HDB, together with DL, Rotherstead Research, Agri-Food and Biosciences Institute, and of course industry sponsors across the UK. So we have three speakers tonight. Joining us is James Daniels, Founder and Director of Precision Grazing, John Frizzell, Business Development Manager for Datamars, Livestock UK, and Dane, Boorder, Youngstock and Grazing Management for Pomeroy Farm, which is one of our 50 farms in the GrassCheckGB project. So tonight's, the way tonight's going to run, we'll start with James and John doing a joint presentation. It'll be around 30 minutes in length, and then we'll have a brief question and answer session. And then Dane will run through his presentation, which will take around 10 minutes, and there'll be time for comments and questions at the end. We'll aim to finish around 8 PM. So without further delay, I'll introduce our first two speakers for tonight. James was introduced to managed grazing systems in New Zealand in 2015, and since then has worked with livestock farmers across the UK to help them adopt profitable pasture-based grazing systems. And John, our resident Kiwi, with extensive knowledge and practical hands-on experience with livestock management systems, including livestock, pasture, and countryside management with fencing, both permanent and electric fencing solutions. So, enough of me, over to you, James and John.
There we go. Right, sorry guys, so just, I'm going to find the mute button. So good evening everyone, thanks for everyone who's joining us. It's always it's a bizarre thing doing these webinars. I can see there's about 120 people on the in the meeting this evening, but also we can't see any of your faces. So it's always a strange thing doing these, let some feedback. But there's a chat function, so if you've got your questions, then please place them in the chat. Me and John will take any questions you have at the end of our session, and again there'll be some time at the end. So yeah, please, anything you think of or anything you want to ask as we go through, just place in the chat and we'll definitely come to you. So with that, away we go, and thanks Nia for the introduction, and yeah, thanks John and Datamars for inviting me to speak to you all this evening. What we're going to run through is sort of go through grazing management, sort of why we may do it, and how, into some of the methods. John's going to give you guys some tips, sort of tips and tricks with regards to infrastructure, particularly electric fencing. We'll then have a look at sort of when you might do it on farm, and take those questions at the end.
Sorry, James, just before you carry on, people are struggling to hear you. Can you get a little bit closer to your speaker, or do you have a headset?
I don't have a headset with me, but yeah, I can move closer to the screen if that's easier.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, cool. Okay, guys. Yeah. So anyone who can't hear very well, then like I say, let us know in the chat, and we'll see if we can amend it. So as I said, Nia, thanks for the introduction. So I'm James Daniel, Director of Precision Grazing. We're farm consultants, and there's a team of three of us: myself, Rhys Williams, who lives in the Clinton Peninsula in Wales, and Sarah Morgan, who's in Shropshire. So together we work with sheep, beef, and dairy farmers across the UK. Particularly in England and Wales, and we do a number of things. We're involved in research projects around grazing systems. We get involved with the business management side and planning side, of the farm. And then we also look at the grazing management, and everything we do can be tied back to pasture-based production systems, and we're interested in and concerned with low-cost, low-cost, productive, and sustainable, or now regenerative production systems. So to help us do that, we work with Farming Connect in Wales, and we lead a number of discussion groups for the Prosper from Pasture project there. And we also have our own discussion groups, which we run in England, and actually they're running in conjunction with Liz Geneva. And so during COVID and during lockdown, we run those virtually, and we're hoping to be back on farm with those groups in October. So if you're on the call and you would like to join a group of like-minded people that are perhaps striving to improve their management of grass, then check out our website, precisiongrazing.com, and there's a link to sign up for the groups there. John, I'll just let you give a brief intro to yourself, and then get into it.
Yeah, great. Thanks, James. Thanks, Nia, for the introduction. Hi, everybody. I'm John Frizzell, Business Development Manager with Datamars Livestock. In the UK, Datamars has 3 distinct product categories with a range of leading brands: Livestock and Identification (LID), which is Z-tags and Tag Faster; Animal Health Delivery System (AHDS), which is Simcoe and NJ Phillips; and Farm Resource Management (FRM) with TrueTest, Speedrite, and Hayes. Works better together. You'll hear more from me later. Over to you, James.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, John. So yeah, I'm sure a lot of people listening will recognise some of those brand names, and so John will give us sort of contribution as we get onto the infrastructure side. So we thought we'd start with the why, and I appreciate there's probably a wide range of backgrounds and experiences and systems with us this evening, but hopefully we can find some common whys to go at. So, from the farms we've worked with, and I'm sure as many of you might realise, your net profit is directly proportional to how much pasture you grow and utilise. So if you surveyed 100 farms and put them in order of pasture grown and used, the net profit generally rises as they grow and utilise more pasture. It's not just about growing the pasture, it's about using it, and we'll discuss that a bit later on. Also on farm, and we take a good interest in the HDB Farm Bench and some of the other national surveys that are done across the country. And what we tend to find, and this is the average farm, this is, we'll put the average in quote marks, there's obviously no such thing, but generally speaking, subsidy comes in, it goes or gets spent on concentrate, feed and nitrogen fertiliser. The farmer gets a calendar and a hat, but there's actually no change in farm profit at the end of it. So we'll see, unfortunately, sometimes a good correlation on farm between the money spent on these 2 inputs don't lead to any more profit. So they're not delivering actually a good return or any return on that investment. Obviously, here, subsidy is going to reduce and change pretty shortly. And if we're buying in these inputs, then we're effectively buying in feed to the farm. So are we going to be able to afford to buy these in? And if we don't, how are we going to be able to provide enough food on farm for the stock we're currently running? And we think we can achieve this, we know we can achieve this by some simple changes in our grassland or grazing management. And that sort of links us nicely to this slide. And we're trying to sort of teach you or go across some simple rules of thumb, and there's a really nice one to remember. It's just 1-2-3 ratio. So if we imagine grass for the cost of 1, as soon as you put a tractor over it or through it, i.e. to make it into silage, bales or clamp, then you double the cost of that feed. If you get your feed delivered in the farm, either hopefully not in bags, but maybe in bulk and blow into a bin, then that feed is costing you, at least 3 or sometimes 4 times the cost of grass. So anything you buy in, you've really got to ask yourself, do I need to buy it, or can I find a way of changing my grazing management, or just tweaking my system to remove or to reduce that cost? On the bigger picture, and I know a lot of our clients are interested and aware of, and I'm sure some of you on the call are, carbon footprint, directly proportional to how much pasture or how much you grow, to how you grow and utilise your pasture. So again, a grazing animal eating the grass in the field, if we take the animal emissions aside for a minute, there's no diesel being burnt to harvest that crop and take it into the animal. And so we know those systems, again, have a lower carbon footprint, so they're burning less diesel, they're importing less feed. Then we might ask, why pasture? Well, it's reasonably simple. Pasture, so when I say pasture, I mean grass, clover, and herbs and forbs. They're really awesome. They grow everywhere, even when they're not meant to. They're high quality, or nearly, well, always high quality when managed. Perfectly suited for cattle and sheep, low cost, zero or even negative carbon, again with the correct management. And by grazing pasture that's managed well in the right system, we know we can increase the quality of meat and milk. And we know that quality is very important when we're comparing the quality of meat. It really helps to offset some of maybe that carbon or environmental footprint compared to some of the other produce. So lots to go at, lots of good surrounding pasture. The tricky thing is that sometimes it just seems so damn hard to manage. So how do we, or how could we manage it? So you think about your role as a farmer. Farmers wear many hats: agronomy, nutrition, vets, builders, fencers. But if we try and simplify that and think about the livestock side, the role of the farmer is to supply the right quantity and quality of feed at the right time so stock can express their genetic potential. So if you're a farmer in the meeting and you're interested in your EBVs and your stock genetics, and you've gone out and spent £1,000 on a ram, or maybe £3,000 or £4,000 on a bull, the curious thing is that the investment you've made in those genetics, you only see those genetics express their potential if you supply the right quality and quantity of feed at the right time. I know a few people have perhaps been disappointed in the investment they've made in new rams, simply because they've not allowed that stock to express their potential. They've been underfed at a key time. So how do we do so? Well, as a farmer, it's really useful to have an understanding of what feed your animals need and what feed the farm has. So we think about those. We have the demand, and the demand on this graph is the red line, and we have the supply, and the supply on this graph is pasture growth, or on a farm it might be supplementary feed, it might be forage crops, could be silage. The tricky thing with pasture is that it fluctuates. The growth fluctuates through the year, and not every year is the same. As a farmer, the demand of our stock is reasonably fixed year to year, and it's really influenced by a mating date and how quickly the animals are growing. But if we can get to know our systems and know what our demand is, so in this system we're looking at in April, the farm's got a demand in early April of 20 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day. And kilos of dry matter per hectare is what we measure our grass in. So I looked at a field, and that field was 6 centimeters high. Then I could express that as something around 2,000 kilos of dry matter per hectare. And obviously the stock would use some of that. We wouldn't let them use all of it, because if they used all of it, they would graze into the soil, and it would take a long time to grow back, if at all. So the farm we're looking at needs to grow 20 kilos a day for the first 2 weeks of April. Now, obviously, if it was measuring its grass, in this season, it found that in early April, the grass growth was nearly 40 kilos. And so that's where measurement comes in. It allows you to see against what you need, what the farm's doing, and helps to hopefully pull out or pinpoint some of the surpluses or deficits on the farm. The surplus is an opportunity. They can also be a problem if we lose quality, because we're growing too much grass too quickly. The deficits are generally more of an issue. So deficits mean stock are underfed, and we can see in March, we have a feed deficit. We have a supply that's less than we need. So if you're not measuring grass, that's where something like the GrassCheck project comes in, because you can hopefully find a farm that's in your region that's reasonably comparable. You can look at what they're doing, and you can maybe try and start to apply the growth for that region back to your farm. But obviously you need to know your demand first. And what's the potential? If we tweak and if we focus on grazing management, we can really improve and increase what the farm can produce per hectare. And there's that great saying, they're not making any more land, and land's not getting any cheaper. If you're fortunate enough to own land, then investing in your own land will give you the best return. You're improving your asset, improving your net worth. So if we move from set stocking, we may grow 6 tonnes of dry matter a hectare a year and utilise about 70% of it. As we reduce how long animals spend in a field, and that's the far left column, so that's days per field. As that gets less, so as we move animals more often, we allow the grass more time to recover, and also because we're not spending so much time in the field, we don't eat the regrowth. So if we can graze the grass plant once, then get off it and let it grow back without changing any of our inputs or pasture species, we will start to grow more grass. We'll also start to utilise a bit more grass as well. And you can see the sort of size of the prize on the right-hand side. A farm that was set stocked could almost sort of double its potential grass growth by moving animals more often. Now, the trouble with growing more grass is that we might need to have more animals. And that's always a bit of a concern we hear sometimes. The thing to focus on and to be aware of is that just because you can grow more grass doesn't mean you've got to up your stocking rate and sort of get busier and work harder. No. What we want to do first is we want to look at the opportunities in the business and say, where are we a bit tight for feed? Where are we having to spread fertilizer to get ourselves out of a hole? Where do we think we're underfeeding stock? And could grazing management help us out in those periods? So here we've got a graph. We've got months along the bottom, so January through to December, and the green line is the farm cover. So that's height of grass on farm as it tracks through the year. We see in this farm, the cover, so the height of grass on farm in March, sort of just before lambing, is getting really low. And we'd sort of say there that was low to the point where it could impact flock performance. And worst case, a cold April meant that as ewes hit the peak lactation, they'd be underfed. It may be a cattle farm and it's trying to turn out cattle and its covers are plummeted and it's going to underfeed stock. So to correct this situation, the hard work or the effort should have been focused over here in September, October. We can see that in this graph. So by rotational grazing, by increasing the amount of grass grown and used on farm through August, September, October, November, the farm was able to improve, to lift the amount of grass on farm in the autumn, and that helped carry the stock through, so it started the spring with more grass. And spring's really important. A farm will grow 40% of its annual production, or annual production potential, happens in the spring. So if a farm could grow 10 tonnes in a year, then potentially 4 of those tonnes would occur in March, April, May, but they'll only occur if the farm's got some grass on it. Great saying, grass grows grass, you need some leaf area on farm. So rotational grazing is not about just increasing stock numbers and trying to max things out. If used correctly, or it can be used strategically to increase grass growth when there's a deficit, or increase grass growth before there's a deficit to help carry you through. And if we think about the farm we're looking at now in the second example, they wouldn't need feed supplements at lambing time. So maybe that's that 5 or 10 grand cost saving straight away. Okay, so just conscious of time, we're going to bring John into this and look at how we might achieve this on farm. So there's lots of different grazing systems, but perhaps the term I like to use is managed grazing. So in a managed grazing system, animals simply move regularly to a new pasture in a planned way. And what we know is there's lots of methods. And if you're on social media, every second photo you see, if your Twitter feeds like mine, is a different grazing system with a different name. So in essence, they're pretty much all doing the same thing. The most common, or where people probably start, is rotational grazing. So these are all managed grazing systems. The animals are moved in a planned way, and they're all trying to achieve the same thing. They're trying to graze the plants once, and then give them a rest, and then come back to them when they're ready to graze again. So quite simply, some simple rules to follow. If the group of animals you run, so your flock or your herd, can't graze a field within 5 days, then add more animals or make the field smaller. So, and we can come back to some of that stuff a bit later on. So here we are, we've got a big field, and for let's say it's 100 ewes and lambs, we want to put in it, because that's the size of flock that we're happy with maybe treating, or we can get in our yards for a weigh or for a vaccination. They can graze it within 5 days. Actually, it's a 20-acre field. It's going to take, they're going to be in it a month before they've grazed it out. So, way to overcome that is to split that field in 4, and 4 paddocks per group is the kind of minimum that we would like to see as part of a managed grazing system. So it doesn't mean splitting a field. It might be 4 fields, and that's normally the easiest way to start. Is to have 4 or 5 fields and just make sure the field, they can graze that field in 5 days. If your fields are big, then you may split the fields. And obviously, this is a lovely rectangular field, which I'm sure matches all the fields you've got at home. So if you're going to have a go at this, or maybe you're doing it already, then I'm sure temporary electric fencing is where you're going to start. So, John, just want to run us through, what makes up a temporary electric fencing system?
Yeah, it's a cost-effective way of getting into it. So on the left there, you've got a simple sheep system there with the poly wire, some geared reels, poly posts, Zama handle connected into one of our new solar energizers. So to get you started with some sheep break grazing. On the right is a simple cattle, 1 line, pigtails, similar with one of our battery energizers. So cost-effective way of getting, you don't have to spend a lot of money. £200 will get you up and running, and you're set to go, and you can build from that.
Yeah, and we're going to look at those components in a bit more detail as we head in a little bit further. So, this is an example actually taken from one of our clients. So we've got the fence distances. So it's 2 largest fields that have been split up into, each been split into 4 to make 8 paddocks. Now, there's little things you can do to make life easier. You've got to get water to all the paddocks. 4 to 6 paddocks is the minimum. 8 is a good number to start with, but again, 3 paddocks or 3 fields, gates closed, water to each field, move the stock once a week. That will get you started with rotational grazing. That will rest more of the farm, and that will grow a little bit more grass. And as we head into September, October, that's going to be pretty valuable. If we move the system forwards, maybe we've got a bigger field, or I think for a lot of people that start with temporary fencing is great, really cost effective, really flexible. You can wrap it up, move it, put it out again, but maybe 12 months or 24 months down the line, you get a bit fed up with moving fences, particularly if they're always going back in the same place. So that kind of leads us, and this is what we see obviously on a lot of dairy farms, is to a permanent electric fencing. So what's different here, John? What are we using?
Bit more substantial. We've got insulators there for a start. So you're needing to strain your wire. So we've got what we call inline wire strainers there, aluminium. So you'll put them in the middle of your fence to get a good strain. The bulk of permanent fencing will be you move on from the poly wires and the tapes onto a hopefully cyclone high tensile 2.5 wire, very conductive, low resistance, and that'll take that pulse a good distance. So you've got from the left, you've got your energizer up into a cutout switch, and then into the fence line. So the benefits are there, as you were saying, is cost effective, and you can, from there, you can cut your fields up, and you've got a current running around your farm. Underground cable there, so you're taking a current under a grate. So you use one of our underground cables, which is a premier insulated cable, so you can go down under the ground and back on up again. So the key thing with the electric fencing is a circuit. You want to keep that intact and keep the current flowing. Another feature there, just on the health and safety side of things, is a warning sign. So if you're near public walkways or public access drives, you need to put a warning sign every 100 meters. So just to highlight the bit of health and safety tonight. But you can see there also our claw insulators. They've got a spark guard, stop arcing. So you're looking at going to permanent. It's always a good idea to look at some quality accessories. You'll get a longer titterly life, and as I say, it's all about that conductivity and keeping the resistance low.
Yeah, and that's key thing to focus on. So the drawing I showed above, again, we're thinking this is a large field, and if we've got big fields and we're thinking about our returns, so what the best return on our investment, then splitting those fields, splitting your biggest fields in half, whether it's with temporary or permanent fencing, would always give you the quickest return. So if it took stock, your largest group you could put together, if it was taking them 10 days to graze the field, and by taking 10 days, they were quite selective. They were leaving the weed grasses and they were running to seed. By simply breaking that big field in half, either lengthways, and lengthways gives you options maybe to sort of break fence it, particularly good for cattle, or even through the middle to make sort of squarer paddocks, and that's really good for sheep, particularly ewes and lambs. A 10-day field goes to 2 5-day fields, and if you imagine your farm was full of 2-hectare paddocks, by necessity, you'd hopefully be moving stock more often and growing more grass at the right time of the season. So we just put this one in for interest. This is a cattle system. This is a 4.7-hectare field. It's a 13-acre field, and it actually costs about £2,000 to set this field up. You think, my God, that's a lot of money to throw into a field. But if you're going to reseed it, that's pretty much what you have to spend on the reseed. You're thinking about £500 a hectare for reseeding, and it's probably a little bit closer to 6 at the moment. So quite a bit of investment, but it broke that field up into 16 paddocks, and it put 4 water troughs in that field. Each water trough services 4 paddocks. What that field did in year 1, with the same inputs of fertilizer and with the same cattle, is it increased live weight per hectare by 50%. And that was run as a trial. So next door, again, permanent pasture field with the same group of cattle, just they were split in half. They were set stocked under the owner's normal management. They ran a larger area, and proportionally, say per hectare, kilos of live weight per hectare, the subdivision or the grazing management, that grazing rotation we can see set up, increased live weight per hectare. So really quick gain, and that gave that return on investment in that 12-month period. So it's quite interesting. Of all the things you can spend money on in farming, actually water trough, water pipes, and electric fencing gives you probably one of the best returns, as long as you've got the stock to eat the grass or you're eating it at the right time. Just a key one to note, I think, before we move on, is paddock shape, 4:1 ratio. So we don't want long, thin paddocks because animals will track in wet weather. The squarer the better. Right, John, we'll, I think, what, minute and a half, and we'll see if we can get through this next little section.
We'll get on to some tips, but this is a range of our, speed ride energizers. So, starting from the big boys, we can head out with the A15XI there, and then the energizers, which is a 3-in-1. You can work solar, battery, or mains with those. As I say, entry sort of level hobby farm type battery energizers, and they're exciting new solar energizers there with the S1000, S500, S150, and S880. In fact, Aled Evans and Alistair Davidson with GrassCheck GB have been trialling these, and we're absolutely delighted with their comments. Fantastic response from them, really positive, and it's a really nice bit of innovation. Speed right is very much about an innovation, manufactured in New Zealand since 1938, and really ahead of their game when it comes to R&D, and we've got further products coming out later this year with regards to Wi-Fi mains energizers. So it's really exciting times for us.
Yeah, I think for me, solar's a really good one to go with, because if animals break out, it's generally because lack of voltage, and 9 times out of 10 is because you forgot to change the battery.
That's it. Yeah, just a rule of one joule of output energy will basically, it will give you roughly 10 kilometers of fence. And just on to the earthing, as I say, it's some tips. This is the most, well, it is the important part of the fence. To get the performance, it's the most effective, to get effective earth system is really important. Rule of thumb there, follow the 3-2-1 rule, 3 meters, 3 meter space between the earth stakes, 2 meters into the ground, galvanized, and 1 continuous feed from earth bar to earth bar. And just a hint there, just to keep away from 10 meters away from your building earths or any other earth systems. But as I say, to get a real effective earth is really important. If there's going to be a problem in the electric fence, 9 times out of 10 it'll be inadequate earthing. Or you've got a dry area, you want to look at very much a moist area for the earthing system. check it out. You don't, if you can get away from your farm buildings, all the better. But just find a moist area and get the earth bars in. It's time well spent.
Yeah, and I'd second that. And your earthing system doesn't have to be right next door to your energizer. Especially if you've got some permanent electric, you can probably run it up to 400 meters from your energizer. So go out and find that wet spot on the farm, and put those earth bars in. And if you haven't got a wet spot, maybe think about somewhere you can water that earthing system. And we've certainly saw guys needing to do that in May this year to keep the voltage up on the fence. So talking of fence voltage, what do these guys do, John?
These are, it's really exciting product there. Another innovation there is our remote with fault finder on the left there. So that basically you'll be out the back somewhere and you'll think, oh, something's not right here. That fault finder will find the fault. It'll give you an arrow direction where the fault is. You can turn your fence off, do the repair, turn it back on, happy days. So that's, as I say, innovation there. It's fairly unique to us, and that links in with our mains energizer and our 15 dual energizer. The voltmeter in the middle there is also a very good tool, but it's just the tools for you. It's very important to measure and monitor, just to make sure your fence is all performing to its best capabilities. The one on the right is just a fence alert. It's a simple little alert you can put on your fence, and 1.5k away you'll see it'll flash red if there's a problem. Yeah, cool. We're going to hold it there, Nia. I think, just conscious of time and giving Dane a chance to say his bit as well. We'll take. Think we've got time for a couple of questions, or do you want to hand over to Dane?
Yeah, no, we'll take a couple of questions. So someone's asked, in regards to tracks, what is the best way to get started? In particular, dairy, with the cows crossing twice a day, of course.
So sorry, Nia, was that to take power across the track?
The best way to get started with the track.
Starting with the track, okay. Yeah, assuming that's a stone track, then you're going to want to run a single, and assuming it's a stone track and assuming it's for dairy, then you're going to want to run a single, you'd say 2.5 mil, John? Yeah. Yeah, high tension strand. Yeah, a lot of people use, you run that on wooden posts, and then on those posts you'd have a choice of insulators. What would you recommend for dairy, John, to get alongside tracks insulator-wise?
I'd stick with the claw. Unless you wanted to take the fence down, you'd use a pin lock. I mean, the beauty of the pin lock is, while the fence is under tension, you can drop them down. If you're moving machinery, you can set it down there on the left. So if you needed to move machinery and it's around a big gateway, you can drop the pin out, drop the wires, and then pick them back up. But I mean, the claw is the preferred one. You get more performance out of your claw. But as I say, it's a choice that's there for you. We can cover both bases. We've also got what we call install tube. Is also a very economical way of getting started. So, a bit of high tensor wire and install tube, 100 mil, 3 mil diameter install tube, very economical. You can get going. And then just up the top, there's a high strain insulator egg. And we've spoken about the inline strainers there on the right, aluminium. So it's a simple procedure. You'll be up and running in no time. Yeah. I know Dane's got some pictures of his tracks, so you'll see an example of those in a minute.
Yeah, and then a question here. Well, it depends on how much work you do up in Scotland, but are you finding enough sunlight in Scotland for the solar energizer?
Yeah, feedback from guys in Scotland, John?
Very positive. I mean, the technology with our solars is you've got 21 days with virtually no sun. The key thing with them is to give them, when you get them out of the box, is to give them a good 24 hours in some bright sunlight to get them up to speed. But no, we've got some really good results from ours. So and all I can say is the new technology, especially with our new S1000, is that they're performing very well. And Alistair Davidson might be on this call up there at Poldine, and as I say, very favourable and some really good positive feedback.
Yeah, I think a key thing is to just be aware of how long a length of fence you're trying to power. And if it's one dual for 10k, that's 10k of permanent fencing. So if you're on a temporary fence, then probably drop that back to 2.5k. So if in Scotland, you might drop that back to 2k or 1.5k. So probably over-speccing the energizer, so getting a larger panel with the energizer for the fence length you need to power might just be a sensible consideration.
Yeah, or head up to an energizers there. Head up, as James was saying, you know, you've a bit more powerful energizer. Head up to a 6 joule, 15 joule energizer with a bigger panel. You can go up to 130 watt panels.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thanks. We'll take a final question and then, conscious of time, so we'll move on to Dane. I'm shifting. Any tips? Are they not short of grass?
Okay, do you mind just repeating that, Nia? I didn't quite hear that from you.
Shifting cattle every 3 days in an 8 paddock system, but cattle always wanting shifted. If they hear or see me, any tips? Are they not short of grass?
Okay, yeah. So we find that some cattle get into a routine. So creatures of habit, they love a routine. If they're shifted every 3 days, they'll generally get used to it. So coming up to that 3rd day, then if they hear someone, they can generally be pretty keen for a shift. Reducing the on time, so shifting more often, can help. Sometimes it coincides with pasture quality, and it can also be weather related as well. So periods of dry weather, and high pasture dry matter, we generally find animals are very content. As we get wetter pasture and unsettled weather, then the pasture dry matter drops. Sometimes the animals are less content. So first thing to be sure of is that there is enough pasture for the animals. So what sort of a residual are they achieving? You can maybe do an animal weight gain. If they're gaining weight, then clearly there's enough feed. So check your pasture allocations okay. Consider the weather conditions, and hey, it's quite often a phase they'll go through that they'll move out of. Just make sure you're allocating enough feed, and that's not the reason.
That's great, thank you. Speaker for tonight, Dane. He's Youngstock and Grazing Manager for Pomeroy Farm. Pomeroy Farm is a family farm operating rotational paddock grazing systems with relatively recent and ongoing upgrades to track and fencing infrastructure. So I'll take it away, Dane.
Brilliant, thank you, Nia. Thanks for that introduction. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So my name is Dane Boorder. As I've presented, I'm in charge of Youngstock and Grazing Manager here at J.H. Viger & Son. I've been asked to talk about the benefits that I have seen with paddock grazing on our estate. Look at the benefits, look at some of the infrastructure that we've put on, but also then look at how GrassCheckGB and being a contributor in there has benefited not only our business, but hopefully has benefited other contributors out there as well. So just to give you a bit of background, J.H. Viger & Son is a family-run farm in Wiltshire. We have 750 dairy cattle, 460 followers and 80 beef. We have a 50 cow point rotary, which we milk twice a day. We employ 12 staff throughout the estate. We have around about 750 acres, not all of which are geographically all in the same area, 300 of which are local grazing. We have a field rotation with pasture, so we not only, when the grass is getting tired or production seems to reduce, we then will put that into maize and then wheat on a rotation. We do buy in bulk feeds as part of our TMR with concentrates, but one thing that we do is we also work with local arable farmers. As a dairy farm, we produce a lot of dung, not all that we can spread on our fields, so we export it to our local arable business in replacement. They also will produce maize that we then haul back in and install in our pits. Just to continue on the farm overview, on average, we're about a 9,000 litre average. We milk twice a day. We're all year round calving with 3 main groups, highs, mids and lows. We do implement paddock grazing. As mentioned, we do have TMR. The TMR allows me to not only buffer the highs and the mids through the grazing season towards the beginning and also the end, depending on whether or not the grass is growing and I've got exceeded supply for my demand. So I'm quite lucky within my grazing management that I can turn out highs and mids for half a day and buffer them with TMR for the other half. If, for example, early on in the season, we've got surplus grass, etc. We've recently gone to Cogent Precision for AI, which we got great results with. And we've also recently, in the last 3 years, adopted ICE robotics, and that's to look at herd health aspects within the business. So looking at improving fertility, lameness, and lying times. So how has paddock grazing benefited us as a business? For me, paddock grazing has allowed me to manage large fields as individuals. We split them into paddocks. As James mentioned before, there's a wide range of various different terminology. But effectively, you are splitting for example, you can see in that picture, that field is actually a 50-acre field. Now, we've split that into individual paddocks. But within those paddocks, we actually, and we'll talk about it in a minute, do 2 feeds with, for example, our low group. So we're also, I suppose you could say, strip grazing or splitting those individual paddocks into sub paddocks for each feed. One thing about managing individual paddocks is, in a 50-acre field, we all know we've got certain areas of fields that will grow quicker through different parts of the season. We've got different soil types, maybe they're slightly heavier clay or they're green sand, and they'll dry up quicker. So we're splitting a 50-acre field, for example, into 6 different paddocks. If one area of the field is growing quicker than the others, I can target the cows to that specific area quicker to get on top of the grass, because if it was a 50-acre, I would have to start at the beginning or the start of the field where the entrance is and the water and move all the way through. The other thing that it allows me to do is if grass is getting ahead and it gets a little bit higher than what we would normally want to graze, we've got options and toolkits that I have. One of the things is pre-mowing. I go in with a set of mowers and I cut the allocated grass and I put the cows in. Only works when it's dry, I have to admit, can't always do it when it's wet. But it means when, for example, you come into a drought or the grass has gone slightly to seed, either going pre-mowing or pulling that out for silage, it means you can get on top of that section of the field. And rather than, for example, you get to the end of the field and it's all gone to seed, but you can't get to it for whatever reason to make it silage and you've got to push through to graze it, you not only are you potentially wasting potential profit and milk gain from within the grass, you also then stunt the regrowth of that grass later on. Benefits of paddock grazing for us is also about recovery and regrowth. If you think of a 50-acre field, by the time you've grazed, for example, you've grazed that last chunk of grass in that 50-acre field, they've probably back grazed that field 10, 15 times, depending on how many feeds you have in that field. By splitting into smaller paddocks, it allows us to get a closer residual to 16 or 1,600 kilos of dry matter. The reason being is, one thing I'll come on to in a minute is about measuring and plate metering, is I can have a look at a section of that field. If that field, for example, comes back as 1.8 feeds, I can look at another section of field which is 2 feeds, and I can jump to that paddock which is 2 feeds and graze that first, and come back to the one which was 1.8, by which point we're 2 days later on, and therefore I then get 2 feeds out of that paddock. Because if I went into it earlier, whereas before moving through a field, I would actually only be getting either overfeeding 1 feed or underfeeding 2. It also allows me to prioritize better grazing. We all know that, as I mentioned before, in a 50-acre field, some bit might dry up and go a bit seedy. Well, I would want to give that to my lower yielding animals, my lows group, because I want to leave my more leafy and where I potentially get more milk from grass and feed that to my mids. So that is why it allows me, by splitting up a paddock, to be able to prioritise which grass or grazing paddock is better for which groups. One of the biggest advantages we've seen over the last 5 years, and it is a progression and still progression, we've still got fields which are in our crop rotation that we're looking to divide up into paddocks. But as you can see there, apart from 2018, which I think everybody knows was a very droughtful year, we have significantly improved the amount of ton. And the reason why we measure the tonnage, and I've got the values there, is because we use a product online, which is called AgriNet, where we store and record all of our measurements and all of our paddock information. A couple of other things is being able to have multiple groups in the same fields. So in a 50-acre field with a track around the outside and multiple entrances, I can put the lows group in the bottom of the field, but also graze the top of the field if that's getting ahead of me with the mids, for example. By having tracks and multiple entrances, you reduce the amount of soil compaction. There's a lot of research these days showing that cows, as we all know, you put them in, stock them in a field or strip graze them, they will always walk the same track to the fresh pasture. They will always, beg pardon, they will always follow the same track to the fresh piece of grass or the fresh allocation that you're giving them. One thing that's underestimated, I feel, is water troughs. By splitting your 50-acre field into multiple paddocks, you will have to look at how you're going to get water to those paddocks. Now, if you've got a 50-acre field or a 30-acre field, how many of you have the water troughs near where the entrance is? Now, by the time you get to the end of the field, those cows are going to walk all the way back for the water. Now, on a hot day, when they're a little bit bothered, we all know dairy cows are quite lazy at times. They're not going to want to walk another 200 meters back to that fresh grass. What they're going to do, they're going to stay around the water troughs and pick the regrowth. And therefore, that field in the long term will take longer to recover. So by splitting into paddocks, it forces you and the business to reassess on how you can maximize the water and where the water is best suited. The other thing, and the big bonus for dairy staff sticking into paddocks, is every time they come in for milking, we give them a fresh piece of grass, is the fact the fence moves are a lot quicker. Rather than that 50-acre field and you putting out 250 or 300 meter worth of temporary electric fence, they've only got 50 or 60 or 70 meters, for example, to put out of temporary electric fence between the two permanent or semi-permanent electric fence, which we'll show on. By splitting paddocks into smaller groups, you know, it happens to us all. I don't get it all right all the time. I'll put the lows in. For some reason, it might be dry. I might have gone in there a bit too quick after umbilicking or injecting dirty water, and it's not palatable. They go in there, they turn the noses up, and they don't graze it very well. Now, if you've done that on a whole field, that is a big problem to sort out. You may have to go in with tractors, be able to mow it, bale it, and take it off. With smaller paddocks, I use our dry cows. I can stick my dry cows in there for a couple of days. They love it. They'll go and tidy up for me. And therefore, I've reset that grazing paddock within 3 days so that in 20 days in my rotation, or as it fluctuates throughout the season, I can come back to a really nice, pristine, leafy, regrowthed field. The other thing having smaller is you can target things like fertilizer and slurry and dirty water. Certain areas of the field, when you do your measuring, may look slightly limier than others, and you need to target fertilizer. It also helps us as businesses, as farmers, to reduce the impact. You know, we're always told about trying to reduce our impact. So by splitting it down and then targeting those with fertilizer applications, you're reducing that. We've seen a massive improvement in paddock grazing on our dairy herd. And one of the things I'm trying to do now is take those principles into our Youngstock. We've got a platform which is not where the main dairy unit is, where we raise Youngstock. And at the moment, they're in sort of 10, 12 acre fields. I want to look at splitting them into subfields again, so that smaller groups of calves of 20, where they, you know, range for 6 to 7 months, can go and graze, and I can rotate them more effectively. Because at the moment, they go in and the grass grows to them, get to the middle of the season, and it all goes to seed head, and then I'm fighting on trying to move heavily in calf Youngstock to try and eat those seed heads and try and maintain the fields. So how did we determine on how to look at splitting our paddocks, or sorry, our fields into paddocks? In front of you there, you can see the picture hopefully at the bottom. Now that is a 40-acre field, 25-acre field. We split it into 4 and 5. It goes around the corner paddocks. So what I did is, how can we utilize the paddocks most effectively for our biggest group? So our biggest group throughout the season, grazing season, is our lows. Usually on average have about 220 cows. They'll each eat around about 8 kilos of dry matter per feed. We tend to go into grass pasture at 2,800. When you do a bit of research, you'll see that the leaf growth on the grass, ideally we go in at 3 leaves. And because of the type of seed that we use, that tends to be around about 2,800 kilos of dry matter. Within the dairy industry, we try and get our residual down to 1,600. Doesn't always happen. Sometimes more realistically throughout the season, that'll increase to 17, 18, 19, 100 kilos of dry matter because of rejects, etc. But doing that calculation at the beginning of the season with nice lush grass, as you can see there, that picture was taken 2 weeks ago for this presentation. So that is how our pasture looks 2 weeks ago using grass rotational. Gives us 2 feeds. We divide each of the paddocks up by semi-permanent. I mean semi-permanent because it's just wooden posts with insulators and high tensile wire. There's breaks in the line. Unfortunately, you can't quite see, but up here there's some closer fence posts together, and they've got electric bungees for gateways. And in here throughout the picture, you can see that we have placed the water troughs in the back part of what would be the first feed. And you will also see that the water troughs are actually placed in line of the high tensile fence, and we tend to put a insulate the wire across the troughs with a creosote rail, for example, so that the cows don't get electrocuted while drinking the water, for example. But it means that those water troughs are served by 2 paddocks. So when I'm grazing the first paddock right in front of you, you've got those 2 water troughs, and you can possibly see some silver in the far right hand side. But then go right over to the left, and that second paddock, they've then got another 4 water troughs. So we can utilize water troughs between multiple paddocks as well. But also it means the cows don't actually have to walk that far in order to drink water. The way we have built tracks, it has been an experiment. It's taken a few years. Is we tend to put rubble in the bottom. Depending on if your tracks are cow only, doesn't always happen. You will always get farm traffic, tractors, and as tractors get bigger, you do want to invest, if you are going to put in tracks, in making sure that it is fit for agricultural traffic as it gets bigger. So this track here was actually put down with rubble in the base. We then put elytic stone down to create a nice hard firm surface, and then what we've done is used actual astroturf, where you've got there's plenty of suppliers in the UK that actually rip up old hockey pitches and football pitches, and they're looking to try and recycle the pitches that they got. And one great thing for us is putting the astroturf down, and it creates a really nice soft. The first time we used astroturf, I have never seen cows run on astroturf as if they were put out for the first day on grass on a new track. It really does make a massive difference to lameness as well. Our lameness has suddenly dropped. Our tracks probably were a little bit stony at times, but stony tracks not a problem. Just chuck the astroturf down. As long as the astroturf's got a nice firm base, it creates a really nice soft cushion for the cows to walk on. So paddock grazing. The key to paddock grazing is measuring. You've got to measure the grass. The reason being, in order to utilize, the reason being is you want to know when the cows have eaten, how much they've eaten, and also that will then tell you how long it will take for that pasture or that paddock to regrow. As you can see in the picture, oh, I think there was an issue with my webcam. Hopefully it's not because I'm dragging on. Oh, I am. Right, I will be a bit quicker. Key thing to measuring is measure once a week, and in peak season is potentially measured twice, especially when you're 120 kilos of dry matter. It's to restrict the people that measure. You want consistency. You want to be walking at a predefined path, so you always walk in the same area, and you want to make notes on what grazing. As you can see here, one of the fields is coming back, is a little bit limey. Potentially that could do with some nitrogen in order to help that. You're looking at rejects and weeds. One tool that we use for recording all of our plate metering is AgriNet, and it also gives us a historic comparison, and it allows us to do weekly grazing planning and also growth forecast. How has GrassCheck benefited us? Well, GrassCheck comes out weekly with gross rates, quality comparison. We bi-weekly send in our grass sample. I actually tend to try and find what I think is the worst performing field or paddock, so that I know that the results I get are my worst case scenario. From that, I can work with my nutritionist to see how many litres of milk I should be getting based on those fresh grass quality results. That then allows me and the business to reduce costs. Do I need to feed more parlour cake? Do I need to feed less? The other thing is reduce costs in feed efficiency. You know, have I got a surplus of grass out there in my paddocks? Can I put more mids out? Can I put the mids out full time rather than half a day? Can I utilise that grass? You know, let's utilise the grass. It grows, it's free if it's managed well. You know, it's better to chuck cows out of grass and they eat the grass than it is to have them housed with the lighting, electric bedding, and feed them TMR. It also allows me, based on that, to be able to maintain body condition, which helps fertility, etc. The other thing with GrassCheck, based on the growth rates of quality comparison, it allows me to forecast the week ahead. Is everybody else in my area seeing grass shortages? Am I coming into a drought? Do I need to start bringing cows in? It's better to bring the highs and mids in and keep the lows out, because they'll utilise the lower quality grass better. It also helps us as a business to maintain formal structure. It focuses the business on maximising the profit from grass. So as time's running out, thank you very much for listening, and I think we will go on to some questions. Sorry, dragged on a little bit.
No, that's great. Thank you, Dane. So yeah, just to quickly mention, if you've just joined us and missed earlier presentations, tonight's webinar has been recorded and it will be on the GrassCheck website. So a few quick questions then. There's one coming in here. Is there any point in rotational grazing in December, January, February when no growth is happening? I don't know who wants to take that.
Shall I go with that one, guys?
Yeah, so I can. Yeah. Obviously, as a dairy point of view, for me in rotational, we actually, towards the end of the season, rotate the dry cows and those heavily pregnant, and also the lows, we keep them out. The limiting factor for us is poaching. So that's really where our rotational grazing ends. Sorry. With rotational grazing, it allows you to get residuals lower, so that coming to the end of the season, you have everything. It's easy to say. Ideally, you have, with rotational grazing, everything under control, so that when we house cattle, the winter then allows it to recover, so that come spring, the grass growth is at ideally 2.8, so that I'm turning my lows out onto fresh, lush, perfect pasture in an ideal world. Doesn't always work, and one of the tools that I have, if it hasn't all gone pear-shaped, is we've got a local sheep farmer that comes in, and he's very grateful usually for the winter grazing, so that helps as well. So, but for him it's also great, it's because with it split into paddocks, I can say, actually, that area of the field didn't get grazed very well, can you go and tidy that up with your sheep? Rather than actually overgrazing the whole field, because sheep, like everything else, if it's got a big 50-acre field, is going to pick the nice, short, lush regrowths before they go for the longer stuff.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Dane.
So probably a key point to make is that rotational grazing, we said we want to get the plant sufficient rest to recover. So in the winter, when grass growth is slower, then the rest period needs to be longer. So in winter on a sheep and beef farm, we're normally looking to provide 100 to 120 days of rest, depending where you are in the country. And so what that looks like for a sheep and beef system, maybe where ewes could stay out all year if the growing conditions allowed, is a field that was grazed in November will be next grazed in March. So we may still be rotationally grazing, but we're just allocating, if it was a 100 hectare farm, we'd allocate 1 hectare a day. And if that 1 hectare didn't have enough feed on it for the sheep that we had, we would supplement to make up the difference, or we'd house or outwinter or do something else with a portion of the flock. So yes to rotational grazing, but it's just managed slightly differently for that period.
Yeah, that's great. Question, why graze down to 1600 and not perhaps 1500, James?
Every 1500's become, if you like, that's what should we say, industry standard, but every cow is different, and cows are very different to sheep. Every pasture is also very different. So just for interest, Dane, what's the average weight of your cows?
So the average weight is sort of 650. So that's what we're looking at. But the issue for us is that our fields, because we do reseed quite often. When you're plate metering, a plate meter doesn't always give you a correct result, for example. So I can walk across a field, and certain areas might actually be grazed at 1400 and some of it at 1600. Our cows, we very rarely struggle. We do struggle to get below 1600. The other thing to bear in mind for other people is, if you do graze and cut, so for example, if you've got a surplus in the early age of in the beginning of the season and you cut that grass, mowers don't tend to get below 1700. Now the issue is when cows go to then graze that, they will only go down to what was cut before because it becomes spiky and that presses on their nose and the muzzle, and therefore they back off. So you might get away with it early on, but if you're sort of later mid-season and you go and cut that for silage and then expect to graze afterwards, you will not get lower than what you got when you cut that with the mowers.
Yeah, that's good. Really good point, Dane. And the thing with residual is, every farm is a little bit different. The thing with residual normally through the season is to try and keep it consistent, because after you graze to a set residual 2 or 3 times, then the grass plant below that height, as Dane was saying, like the cutting event, becomes more spiky and less palatable. So if 1600 is the target, the focus for the businesses are maintaining that target. If 1500 is the target, the focus for the business is maintaining the target. So most people would maybe start the season at 1500 and accept it rises to 16, maybe 1650 as the season progresses, and they reset that as the season goes on. But consistency will be the key with residual.
Okay, thanks. A question perhaps John and James. What is the best fence for sheep on stubble turnips? Is it a 2 or 3 wires or possibly net?
Well, over to you, John. You just muted for a minute, John. Do you want to flick your mic on?
Unmuted. There we go. Yeah, no. 3 is a better option. You'll get away with 2. It just depends on the volume of the foliage. You need the power to get through that foliage. But to say 3, I would probably recommend 3. Just depending on the foliage.
Okay, thank you. So there's quite a few questions coming in. Is there an app that will split your fields into paddocks so you know they're exactly, say, split into 4? James, I think you're on mute, perhaps.
Yeah, no, so I go to unmute myself and then someone unmutes me and it goes, anyway, sort that out. There's no specific app that will automatically break the field into paddocks, but there are a number of apps in your app store that will allow you to draw a square or a polygon on your phone and see what area it is. So if you search your phone for a map tool or mapping tool, or even farm map tool, then you'll get a number of options, and just most of them are free to use, so try one or two. The nice thing with those tools on your phone is that a bit like if you've used Google Maps for directions, you can see where you are. So if you've drawn a paddock and let's say it's a 4-hectare field you want to split in half, then you can go around the boundary on the app on your phone. It will show you where that break fence line is, and then you can go to the field and actually walk or drive that line and then put your fence up on it. So we have a lot of people using that, a lot of dairy farmers using that in the season once they know what area they need to allocate, having measured the grass, or a lot of beef and sheep farmers using it maybe to set up that 4 or 8 paddock system for the first time.
Yeah, it's just about any advice or tips perhaps on how rotational grazing differs with non-ryegrass kind of pastures? The question's coming from someone who's got a farm that's too dry to grow good ryegrass.
Yeah, cool. So if you're not growing ryegrass, then yes, you're growing a clover or herb-based sward. So it might be a plantain chicory, and we might have other herbs in there as well. But as a rule of thumb, because we like rules of thumb, easy to follow, you would go in when it was 30 centimeters, so that's a foot, 12 inches, and you graze it down to 7 centimeters, so that's around sort of 3 inches. Now that 3 inches or 7 centimeters isn't going to be like your lawn or consistent perfect height. It's going to be a little bit variable, so you just got to go with the average. But the key with those swords is to make sure you leave some leaf area and you would leave a higher residual. So in terms of kilos of dry matter, whereas Dane's going down to 1600, then you'll probably be getting down to 2000, maybe 2200 on that sword.
Yeah, so kind of last question then, just to round up, one for you, Dane. Does the for your Youngstock rotation, will you run a number of age-determined groups, and what age would you put calves out to graze?
Okay, so for Youngstock, I've actually done a bit of an experiment again this year, where we have split some of the paddocks up into smaller. We took a first cut off, it then came back, and as the grass was growing back to the calves, I've turned calves out this year at 4 months, but with a supplementary feed of cake to help the transition. And I will run ages right the way through to a month before calving. They then come into a transition group with the rest of the herd, onto which would be a mix of straw, maize, and a blend, in order to prepare them obviously for the transition in. But with regards to Youngstock, all ages. But the youngest I personally will turn out is what I did this year. It was at 4 months, and 4 months I measure every month, and we've been getting a kilo to a kilo 10 of growth rates consistently from there. Historically, I've never really turned out to 6 months, and the reason being is we have had issues on our farm with coxy, and we use decox in our cake. So I tend to feed the calves and try and get them immunity, well, resistance to coxy with the cake, with the decox in it up to about 5-6 months, and then would turn out because they've got an immune system to various different things. We've also had time to worm vaccinate for husvac, etc., for lungworm with husvac, etc. So historically, it's always been 6 months plus, but this year I've done a trial at 4 months and it's worked really well, and I probably will follow that on. But I think the key thing is either get in there early with fresh, clean pasture, ideally after first cut of silage, especially with younger animals, just because they're more susceptible to, especially out on fresh grass, with things like worms, etc. Okay, so that's my advice.
That's great. We will take a couple of other questions just because there's so many come in. So someone completely new to rotational grazing found a larger piece of land than what they need, and concerned about the risks of undergrazing. A very rough rule of thumb: how many raising cattle / sheep does the individual start with?
Do they say how big this field is, or what how big the area is? 30 hectares. Okay, and we haven't got any guidance as to where they are in the country?
No, sorry.
Okay, that's yeah, that's maybe an impossible question to answer. As a very rough rule of thumb, if it was 30 hectares of, on the average farm in the UK, and not thinking about the winter, so we assume they've got, a decent winter option, and that's not a limiting factor. If it was sheep, then we'd look at sort of 10 ewes a hectare. That's sort of ewes that might scan at 170%. If it was cows and calves, we'd look at 1 to 2 cows and calves a hectare. So that's a cow an acre, or just over an acre a cow. If it was growing cattle, let's say this was weaned calves at 12 months old in the spring, then we probably take it up to 4 of those a hectare. And that's very, that's a very, very rough rule of thumb. And the better thing for them to do would be to look at GrassCheck to see what a farm like theirs in their area was actually growing, and to then have a look at what that system looked like, and to speak to people in the area. Grazing management will make a hell of a difference to that farm as well. Grazing management, we could double the number of stock that farm would carry. Obviously, winter would be the big consideration. What would be the first limiting factor for that farm? Could be the first limiting factor.
Okay, yeah, that's great, thank you. And then final question, in regards to AstroTurf, seemingly a cheap means of making a track currently. Do you have any concerns about disposal of it at all?
Not at the moment, to be honest. It's something that we're trying at the moment. It's something we have tried. Where did we put the first bit of AstroTurf down? It was probably 2 years ago. We just, sometimes it will tear. We'll get patches which are worn, and we put another AstroTurf layer on the top. It's sort of a bit of an unknown for us, I'm going to be honest. We don't know how long it's going to last, and it may get to a fact where we have to dispose it in the future. But the cost of potentially disposing it compared to the cost benefits based on lameness, mobility, etc., being able to give cow comfort, I think will outweigh any potential disposal costs in the future.
Yeah, good points. Yeah, so just going to kind of round up. Big thank you for everyone who's listened today. We've had a really great turnout and participation in this webinar. Special thanks, of course, to our 3 speakers, John, James, and Dane. And the recording again will be you'll be able to watch back on the GrassCheckGB webinar. And for those who've registered for tonight's webinar, you'll receive an email alerting you when it's live on the website. So yeah, thank you all. Diolch yn fawr. Yeah, that's that.